Olson.
Here.
Berardi.
Here.
Smith.
On the call.
Frankel.
Also on the call.
Stylen.
Aye.
Arthur.
Present.
Did I lose you?
Are you still there, Jeff?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. All right. We got everybody, Kat?
Yes.
Okay. And now we'll move on to the report on council activities. Councilor Kohlhoff, are you there?
I am. So I know that
The floor is yours.
I know you have a very long agenda. It started early, you're going to stay late. Two things. Councilor, or you're not a councilor, you're a commissioner, right? If you're on this DRC. So Commissioner Arthur asked a question the last time, and I misspoke. The memo that the DRC submitted got submitted to our manager before COVID, and then circulated back. So I think about a week ago or so, it was attached to one of our weekly reports, and so I had a chance to reread it. But that has not been discussed, and we're going to have one more meeting. It's not on the agenda tomorrow night, and then we have August off. So the first chance it would be looked at is in September. And, you know, it was well done. It was soft. It didn't really require money. And I appreciate your effort. We'll see what happens. But I kind of brushed it off, and that wasn't correct because, to be honest with you, if I saw it in March, I'd forgotten about it too. The second thing that that is big on, aside from the DEI matters that are still in such flux that you've been listening to it all night, you don't need to get into that. That's taking a great deal of time. But the other piece is the Tryon Creek wastewater treatment materials came to council, and the nut of that coconut is that up to now, I think there was a sense that we would end up with a perfectly good, if not as exciting a product, if we participated with the city of Portland in upgrading the plant. On the other hand, they were not interested in a new plant. And so the question was, well, if we did the new plant, how would it be financed? And what was proposed was a PP3, a private partnership, which brought in a bunch of other details. So the long and the short of that is we're going to keep working on it. Probably the last jump off would be September of 2021. But I think that it's a pretty significant project based on what the city has gone through in the past with public financing and what it might be willing to do to avoid that, or if it should avoid that. So stay tuned on that. Anything else? There's plenty more, but to me, that's the biggest thing that's on our plates right now until at least we get back from vacation in August.
Okay, does anybody have any questions?
No, thank you for the report.
Yeah, one more time.
Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Councilor Kohlhoff, thank you very much. All right, next order of business, we move on to findings, and it's for LU 19-0041. A request for the following: a lot line adjustment, an RP district delineation, a development review permit to construct a 160-unit multifamily housing project, approval of a parking study for shared parking, an unavoidable utility crossing for a stormwater facility, minor variances for retaining walls, and removal of 112 trees. The site is located at 5600 Meadows Road, 21E07BA00900. Staff coordinator is Johanna, Hastay, senior planner. Have you all read the findings?
Yes.
Do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions. This is Arthur. I just wanted to mention that at our hearing last time on this application, I thought Vice Chair Poulsen's comments about the process and the evidence and how we go about making this decision, I thought Dave made some very insightful and compelling comments. But then in the end, I was persuaded by Commissioner Smith, who reiterated that our job is to apply the criteria to the evidence as it reaches us and as the criteria is provided to us. So I will be voting in favor of these findings on LU 19-0041, and I have no modifications to them.
Is that a motion?
Oh, I'd be happy to move approval of these findings conclusions in order for LU 19-0041-1990 on the entire matter involved in the application.
Second.
Been moved and second. Kat, can you do the roll?
Shearer,
Yes.
Poulsen,
No.
Flaherty,
No.
Smith,
Yes.
Frankel,
Yes.
Silent,
Yes.
Arthur.
Yes.
It passes as, I believe, right, Kat? 5-2?
Yes, it's 5-2.
Okay, very good. We'll move on to LU 19-0044, a request for the following, and a 10-lot subdivision for the planned development overlay and the removal of 152 trees for construction of site improvements. This site is an unaddressed vacant lot on the east side of Willoughby Drive. Map and tax plot lot references 21E07AD02800 and 21E07AD02802. Staff coordinator is Evan Cranstead, associated planner. Is there any discussion on these findings as submitted? Hearing none, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I move that the findings for LU 19.0049 be approved as submitted.
I second the motion.
Okay, Kat, could you take the roll?
Shearer,
Yes.
Poulsen,
Yes.
Flaherty,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Frankel,
Yes.
Silent,
Yes.
Arthur.
Yes.
Okay, passes. Our next item on the agenda is a work session. This is kind of stems from, we've all kind of talked about it, the traffic issues in Lake Grove. Randy received and forwarded to me a letter he got from a neighborhood association. And they're feeling the pinch of the traffic. My feeling is, in the last let's just say 3 years, we've approved the Springs, the Center Cal project at the old Mercantile Village, and now Shorenstein's project. And in addition to that, there's at least 3 that I can think of other, mixed use work living arrangements in Lake Grove. And I think my opinion is I'm not sure where the city is headed as far as traffic and their traffic study for Lake Grove. And it just seems like there's a lot of traffic in those areas, and the people that come before us seem to be pretty upset with the traffic. And my thought was that we put together a letter. It doesn't have to be lengthy, just saying we're getting a lot of push about traffic in the Lake Grove area, and then it's come to our attention through these hearings that there's a lot of projects that have been approved that are going to impact the traffic, and those projects, in fact, on at least one occasion, are working for quite dated overall traffic studies, even though they brought in engineers saying their impact would be no more than what it is for a building. I think the city needs to take a look at traffic for the Lake Grove area, and I would welcome to hear what the rest of the commission feels.
Pardon me, Chair Scheer. This is Jessica.
Yeah.
So we did bring staff, engineering staff, to the meeting this evening. We thought it would be helpful for the commissioners to have some background on just traffic, background info about traffic in the Lake Grove and Cruz Way Meadows area, and also some recent studies, particularly with the roundabout that's at Cruz and Carmen, which I know has been a topic of discussion in a number of applications. So Erica Rooney, and is Will Farley still here, Erica? Okay. I just can't see him on my screen. They're both here, and if you would like, they do have a short presentation to provide the commission, if you wish.
I'd like to see it.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, before we have that presentation, if I could make a comment, this is Evan.
Yeah.
I just want to remind the commission, or just put it on the record, of course, the commission's task in approving development is to mitigate the impacts of each development. That is, the commission looks at each development individually, determines the impacts, and applies mitigation measures. The commission's job is not the planning commission to look at traffic generally. However, having said that, if you want to communicate to the council on items that are sort of tangential to your responsibility, that's fine. But I just put the parameters there.
Well, I understand what you're saying. We're just saying we're seeing this as a constant problem.
Right. You're just reporting it.
We don't have to go in.
No, and that's why.
As far as I'm concerned, the letter we would send would be quite short, saying we're seeing and hearing there's traffic issues. We'd like to know what you're. We're thinking we need to take a look at this. Something along those lines.
Right. This is Randy. The emails I received was from the Luga Neighborhood Association Board and Jeff Novak. I think what they were asking for was for the DRC to consider communicating with the city council that the DRC members are concerned about traffic issues in the Lake Grove area, and how do we continue to grow our economic opportunities in the Lake Grove area and surrounding areas without negatively impacting the surrounding neighborhoods through enhanced, unplanned for traffic ramifications. So I think some type of statement from us that we are interested in this, would like the council to consider giving it high priority among the other things it's addressing, would probably be sufficient.
Okay, and on top of that, we don't know what the city's doing, so maybe, Will, you can walk us through that.
Jeff, before they before they say anything, I'd like to add a little bit here to this. You know, I think what Evan is saying is important because, you know, the whole idea of the commission is to approach every project with, you know, as much objectivity as possible. So, you know, we don't have any biases that can be looked into by any of the applicants or anybody else. So, you know, just a short letter to the council that says, you know, we've seen some things that are making our job difficult, I think might be the approach that I would take. And the one I would bring up as just an example was, you know, my concern about the fact that we were looking at Shorenstein and a 20-year-old agreement that was, you know, held and established the traffic criteria that they needed to address as part of their application. And that, you know, and as everybody knows, you know, all these applications have a you know, shelf life of about 6 years, even with extensions. And the purpose for that is because the world changes. And not only did the world change in the past 20 years in this area, but it changed significantly. Especially the one you forgot, Jeff, was because you weren't on the commission at that time, was Cruz Village, which is the Graymore development on the corner of Cruz and Carmen that you know, heavily impacts that roundabout in this particular case. So you add that one up, plus the Mercantile, plus the Springs, plus the Sorenstein multifamily, plus anything else that's happened, you know, around the area, and none of that seemed to come into play here as part of our you know, deliberations, because it was precluded from coming into it. And that's the, you know, I don't know how to phrase the letter, but that'd be my concern, is how do we present the council says, look, we would like a look-see to make sure that there are other things here that have missed the changes that have happened in Lake Oswego over time that have led to these traffic problems. So those are my only.
Yeah, I don't argue with what you're saying. I mean, my idea was that we're saying would be to say we're seeing these issues as your eyes and ears on a commission board. What are we doing? Are we doing anything? And should you take a look at it? And maybe Will can tell us what's going on.
And, you know, I just want to just double up a little bit on the fact that of all the issues that we address or have to listen to in our hearings, you know, the public is mostly concerned about, well, the three things, you know, trees, traffic, and stormwater seem to be a repeating theme on our projects, you know, and traffic being, you know, I don't know, maybe it's number one, because it really affects people's quality of life when these projects go in. So that's why we're bringing it to their attention, that we want, you know, to be able to review applications that are current and really reflect the actual conditions that are out there, so that when we make a decision, we don't feel we're in this kind of dilemma of following the code versus knowing what is really going on.
All right.
That's all I have.
Will?
Yeah, Eric and I both have a presentation. Let's see if I can share it and not break anything tonight. Does everyone see the correct slide? And not the note slide.
Yes, we do see the correct slide.
I'll let Erica start.
Yes, good evening, Commission. I'm Erica Rooney, and I'm the City Engineer and Engineering Director for our Engineering Department and Water Treatment Plant. Will Farley, our Traffic Engineer, and I are going to cover a number of things for you this evening to sort of help put things in context. There's things that have gone on that maybe you're not aware of, and sometimes it's just really helpful to take a breath and look at some of the facts and look at some of the information, and then that may help you decide how you want to move forward with questions to council, or your request, whatever. So we've got a presentation here. We're gonna, excuse me, tag team a little bit. So bear with us as we try to do this from different locations. And then we'll certainly be here to answer questions. What I want to start with tonight is, let's see, let's go to the next slide there. I've got Will doing my slides for me. There we go. Is we want to talk about the recent traffic analysis work that has gone on out in these areas, some of which you may have heard about or maybe not. So I'm going to start with, first there's going to be the Quarry Road analysis, which is something that we did last spring and early summer when we received a letter from the Waluga Neighborhood Association that was sent to the city manager's office, the planning commission, and the planning director. It was May 29th, I think was the date of their letter. And they were concerned about the traffic volumes on Quarry Road and what were we going to do regarding traffic to mitigate for all of these developments, as you've alluded to earlier. So what we did is we decided we would respond to the questions about what is really happening on Quarry Road, and we would dig into it a little bit further. About that time, I lost our traffic engineer that we had at the time, and then I was tasked with pulling that together. So we then went to, in July of well, actually 1 year ago, in July of 2019, we went to the Planning Commission and shared those results. I'm going to share that with you again tonight at a high level. We'll go over some of the highlights. And then we're going to talk about what's happened since then. The second bullet up here is talk about some of the new things that we've done on Quarry Road as a result of actually part of the mitigation for the Boones Ferry Road project. And lastly, we're going to talk about, and we'll touch on this as well, the roundabout analysis that we did. So in the fall of 2019, we decided it was time to try and answer all of these questions you all have brought up, other people have brought up about the level of service at the roundabout at Carmen, Meadows, and Quarry, because different traffic studies had different results, and there's a reason for all of that. And what we did is we hired a consultant to help us put that together and do the investigation and give us some answers that are easy to share with you tonight. So that's where we're headed at the end. Starting with the Quarry Road analysis that we did in 2019. So just to go over the characteristics, next slide, please. Just so you all know, and I think most of you do, Quarry Road is a neighborhood collector. Neighborhood collectors in our transportation system plan are expected, anticipated, whatever word you might want to use, to carry anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 or 6,000 cars a day. That's their function. Smaller roads come into them, they carry that neighborhood traffic away from the area and connect up to the larger system in a perfect world. It is, however, just a 2-lane road, predominantly residential with a large park obviously in there, and then a little bit of commercial at the very southern end. It's about 3,100 feet between the roundabout and Boones Ferry Road. It is posted speed is 25 miles per hour. There's a few three-way stops on there and a number of speed bumps. If you could go to the next slide, please. This is a visual just to get things in perspective. Up at the top is where the roundabout is. There's a couple speed bumps as you're in that diagonal section of Quarry. Come around the corner and then you have an all-way stop. You have another all-way stop down at Douglas, just 2 blocks away. A block and a half away, you have speed bumps, a speed bump just south or just north of Oak Ridge, and then another all-way stop at Oak Ridge. Down at the bottom at Boones Ferry Road, there is a semi-diverter that is supposed to keep traffic from turning left off of Boones Ferry and going north, but we've all seen it happen, and it does do that. So it's a semi-diverter that partially works. What we did is we took a look at what's really happening out there on Quarry Road over all these years. So this is a diagram that shows 3 different locations of where we've been counting on Quarry Road over the last, 16 years, 17 years. And what you can see is that, the volumes kind of peaked out right before the recession, and then they've tapered off. Now, again, this is pre-COVID, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But in general, the volumes at the northern end in particular of Quarry Road have stabilized or gone down a little bit. And in fact, on a percentage basis, the quarry road volumes have dropped 15 to 16%. Of note, a date that you need to keep in mind, it was alluded to earlier by Commissioner Paulson, was the Lakeview Village was up and running in 2014. So more traffic. What you'll see is maybe not that story per se with the different comparisons. And as you can see on this particular slide, there was no spike in the traffic between 2014 and 17 when counts were taken on quarry. As a matter of fact, it's gone down. So, you know, the volumes have been higher in the past, pre-recession of 2008-9. Next slide, please.
Hey, Erica, just one point of, you said Lakeview Village. I think you meant Cruz Village.
Oh, my apologies. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, yes. So many lakes, views, and villages. Yes, Cruz Village at the roundabout. That is what I meant specifically. Yes. Thank you. As a comparison, so like I said, quarry is a neighborhood collector, and we wanted to, and it seems to be stabilized or possibly going down just a hair. We wanted to see what's happening with the rest of the system. Hopefully, when new traffic comes in, it stays more on the collector systems or above. And what we found here is this is a comparison of major collectors in the area, the Lake Grove area, some on Meadows, on Carmen, two places on Carmen, and Carmen Cruzway roundabout. This shows you that, again, the volumes in 2019 had just begun to hit the pre-recession volumes. They dropped way down after the recession and had just now started getting back up to the pre-recession areas in several cases. But they are trending upward, anywhere from 15 to 24%. So that's better than them going on the neighborhood streets. So it's not a problem, just that's what you would sort of expect. Next slide will show you the major arterial volume history. So pushing that up to the Boones Ferry and the Cruz Way level type of streets. You can see again that the 2008-2009 recession and the aftermath of that kept the volumes down fairly low. They started to come back up a little bit here, a little bit there, dropping off at 19 possibly, hard to tell. But let's just say that they're not at the same level that they were in 2007 and 2008 on the major arterials. But they are, in the last 10 years, just 10 years, anywhere from a 4 to 24% increase. And some of them even decreasing. Next slide, please. So the summary of what we found and what we shared with the Planning Commission at that time was that the quarry road volumes were generally trending downward or stable. They certainly weren't going up by any means. The other things that we shared with them is that the quarry road speeds had maintained the same speed that they'd had for many years, which the 85th percentile, which means 85% of the traffic is traveling at that speed or less. The 85th percentile on Quarry Road has been anywhere from 24 to 26 miles per hour for a long time, for several years, and it hasn't changed. It's still in that same ballpark, which means it's posted 25, which is actually very good that it's maintaining that. It's posted correctly. The nearby arterial volumes are trending upward. Okay, they're better able to handle it. That's better that they're going up and Quarry Road is stabilized. And that we did also notice that there may be some cut through that exists. We did a very cursory sort of origin destination study with some software. It was a little bit, it was a bit limited on what we could do, but what we did find is that there was some cut through traffic that it exists, but that happens on any of our roads that are connected. There's always going to be some level of cut through traffic. Because we also have a very limited network on the west side where we don't have a nice grid system. There's not a lot of options. So people coming from Cruzway area to go south to Boones Ferry or Bryant, if they don't want to go on Boones Ferry, they will go through Quarry. But it's not as many people as you might expect. It wasn't alarming, at least. So we ended with the Planning Commission at that point And I believe from there, the Planning Commission wants to, and I don't know if Scott Siegel will be on with us a little bit later. He can elaborate on this a little bit more, but the Planning Commission may take this into consideration as a part of their work plan to look into some of the code language related to the Cruiseway corridor. But this is where we left it with them, and no further action was taken at that time, except that, as I said, later on, we'll get to it in a little bit, we did end up doing some independent analysis of the roundabout. But in the meantime, late last fall, as a part of the Boones Ferry Road project, we actually did an installation of a device that was part of the mitigation for that project. And this is where I'm going to start to turn it over to Will, where he's going to talk about the next two bullet areas, which is the new speed reader board on Quarry and what we're seeing there. And then he'll also roll into the part about the roundabout analysis. Any questions on the Quarry piece before we go on?
Erica, I've got just one quick one. The Cruise Village development was approved in 2014, and I believe it was constructed, finished by summer of 2015. But then when was do you know when the site was, fully occupied? So it achieved its full projected traffic in AM, PM peak periods.
I don't know exactly when the full occupancy has occurred. Can you go back a second, Will, for me? Go back to the major arterials in particular. Oops. Here's Boones and Cruise. So if it was in 14, I think they started a little before 14. Either way, 14, 15, 16, somewhere in that range. They certainly have been fully occupied for at least 3 years now, because I know for a fact I've been going to that coffee shop for a while on my way in. So, what you're seeing here is possibly some upticks in that 15, 16 range, but not huge, not huge. And then some trending downward. We did not see that on Quarry Road, though. If you go back one or two more slides, the Quarry Road volumes are not showing a change.
Right. And when I get later on in the presentation, I can show some of the impacts of Cruise Village come in.
Yeah.
It'll be in the third bullet point.
And how were these studies conducted? I mean, who did it, and what was their parameters for the study?
So this work was based off of, we did this work internally. It was based off of information that we have available from our annual traffic counts that we conduct all throughout the city every year. We have a huge number of counts that we set up. It's done with the rubber tubes that you see crossing the road. So we collect this data on an annual basis, or not every location annually, but throughout the city every year we do it. We did not do it this year because of COVID. But we'll be setting them out again. So we just used our basic historical information that we had to put this synopsis together.
So no one did an AM or PM count?
Not on this matter. We have that information lower or in further detail if we needed to get it at each of those locations. We do talk about that though with the roundabout.
Okay. Okay, that answers my question. That's all I want to know.
Yep, we'll hopefully get to that. Yeah, these were average daily trips, total volumes. That's what we were looking at on that one.
Okay.
Okay. I'll turn it over to Will to talk about the new speed reader board.
So one of the things I got to inherit when I joined the city was our speed reader board that we had installed as part of the Boones Ferry Road project. This was installed to address the concerns of increased traffic volumes along Quarry, as well as a perceived speeding concern. We deployed the driver feedback sign, which you can see in this picture. This sign reports the speeds of southbound traffic on Quarry Road and kind of stores them on a server for us to look at a later date. Just to kind of give an cost estimate of this device, it was about $40,000 for this installation, which included running power and the device and everything else to it. So this speed reader board, as I said, collects the travel speeds and traffic volumes each day at this location. This data has been collected and is presented in monthly reports since January of this year. It started January 1st, 2020, when we started keeping our data. In reviewing the reports, it was observed that the traffic volumes have dropped to about 45% of normal after Governor Brown issued the stay-at-home order. So COVID impacts dropped the volumes quite low on Quarry. As of this last month's report, the volumes in June were still about 75% of normal, what it saw back in January and February. Where most areas have seen an increase in travel speeds due to the less traffic, the prevailing speeds on Quarry Road have remained consistent at 25 miles an hour. So the less traffic has not shown an increase in travel speeds. That's pretty much all about the speed reader board. It's just kind of a little tease. If anyone has any questions about that one, I'm willing to answer them. Hearing none, on to the meat. So we have a study for the Carmen Meadows Quarry Roundabout, since it's been a little bit of contention from the neighborhood and some of the developments going in there. So as DRC understands, since 2012, several land use cases have been reviewed that involved that roundabout in some capacity, and reported results that vary between level of service A and level of service D for its operation. To kind of give you an idea of level of service, it's based off the delay that cars are expected to experience when approaching the roundabout and getting through it. And our standard is level of service E. So anything beyond, I want to say it's about 50 seconds of delay, we would consider to be failing at that intersection. So on this slide, I have a table. This table shows the history of the land use cases presented in front of DRC and the results for each of the respective existing conditions analysis during the PM peak hour. So I didn't go into the future year analysis. I just wanted to present you, here's what they saw for existing conditions. The table shows the case number, the date the data was collected, at the base of the analysis is referenced to, the total entering volume to that intersection. So you had a curious of when the Cruz Village became operational, you can easily see that while we had a pretty good uptick between a small uptick between 2013 and 2016, but a decent one between 2016 and 2017. Kind of shows that there was something there that generated a little bit more traffic. This also shows the methodology used for each of the analyses, as well as the software, because the software can have an impact on it too. And as I said, results. As can be seen, each study utilized different software and different analysis methodology in estimating delays. And I'll move on. I can geek out about this table quite a bit. So we had Keller Associates conducted analysis of the roundabout using all the different methodologies to kind of give us a grand scheme of, well, what is the difference in software? What is the difference in methodology? So we contracted with Keller Associates late last year. We used Keller Associates because they had no other study in the city. They haven't been tied to any development. They are completely independent and give just an independent analysis free of any development or free of any approval of any development. So they use the different delay calculations and different softwares, including the Highway Capacity Manual from 2010, the Highway Capacity Manual 6th edition, which was about 2016, and SIDRA. To conduct these analysis, we required new data to be collected at the intersection. So we had data collected November 14th, which corresponded to, there was school in session, the weather was about average for the area. Nothing significant should have impacted the counts at that time. So those were two different tables showing kind of everything, or together in piecemeal, the land use cases and the Keller analysis. I put this one together so you can see kind of the line of thought of all of them together and see how the existing conditions are reflected at that intersection. You can see that they're pretty much the same. You can see the total entering volumes have dropped since 2017, about 130 vehicles. So total entering vehicles would be per hour or during the peak hour and not the day ADT that was referenced earlier. And then went the wrong way, my apologies. So since a lot of people say, well, the traffic engineer is just punching their numbers into the spreadsheet and coming up with a result, it doesn't reflect field verification or field conditions or reality. So as part of this analysis, we made Keller verify the analysis results with some field observations. We wanted to see the link between what they were telling us it was operating at and what it was operating at. To do this, they used a queuing analysis, which was conducted to compare results from each of the analysis methodologies with the observed back of queue that they saw in the field. In this comparison, it was shown that SIDRA was the preferred methodology, with the most recent HCM 6th edition being acceptable. It wasn't too far off. HCM 2010 was not recommended due to underestimating the roundabout's capacity and overstating delays. So it was giving results that just weren't reflective of reality at all. And then we had Keller also look at future year analysis. So using the TSP's, or the Transportation Systems Plan forecast for growth, we said we wanted to see what they thought conditions would be in 2035 at the planning horizon. In their analysis, they showed that the HCM 2010, the roundabout was going to fail. It's going to operate at 60 seconds of delay during the PM peak hour on average, and its capacity is going to be over 100%, 18% over 100%. However, if you looked at it with HCM 6 or SIDRA, it was going to operate acceptably. It was going to be at level of service C with less than 30 seconds of delay, getting higher in capacity, but still acceptable for any developments. And then I'll turn it back over to Erica for the wrap up.
Yeah, I want to add something too, Will. The thing that to keep in mind here, folks, with roundabout level of service is and the software that is used for it, it's not the same as doing the analysis for an intersection that's a signalized intersection. And over the years, different software has been used, it's been improved, and also what has changed is our ability to drive the bloody things. People are much better at driving roundabouts now. At first, or the first few years we have roundabouts in this country, everybody's very hesitant, very cautious. And so the delays actually are longer. What they have found in general is that people are much more comfortable with them. And so even though the volumes may have stabilized and not changed much, we're managing those roundabouts much better than we did 10 years ago as drivers. So all those things reflect into what you're seeing in the field, which is the queues aren't nearly as long as they were, several years ago, and our software is getting better at analyzing the actual level of service at a roundabout. So I just wanted to add that. In conclusion, here's where we are. Our neighborhood collectors are holding steady and not increasing, which is a really good thing to hear, especially when it's a residential neighborhood collector. The volumes on the collectors and arterials in general were, on the major collectors and the arterials were approaching pre-recession levels prior to COVID-19. Who knows where they will go from here, but for several weeks, maybe over a month or 5 weeks now, what we're seeing, at least on the major collectors, is that according to information from ODOT, things are kind of topping out at about 75% of pre-COVID levels. Will it change? Maybe. But our whole system has changed quite a bit in that we don't have the AM and the PM peaks nearly like we used to. Volumes are spread out more throughout the day, even though they're at 75%. Lastly, the roundabout at Carmen and Quarry is actually operating very acceptable level of service and is still projected to do so using the best software available today. It's anticipating that in 15 years, it'll still be at a reasonable level of service. So that's our traffic study of that area in a nutshell. And I know we went through a lot of stuff quickly, but we wanted to share all of that with you.
Erica, thank you. Will, thank you. Guys, do you have any questions?
Yes, Craig, I do. One, that was really good. Your expertise really shows here, and the graphics were really good and the data. So thank you, Erica and Will. Thank you very much. And this is probably more of a question for Jessica and Evan. I'm guessing this presentation or data could not have occurred last week because we had to go by a contractual agreement that using their data, correct?
Evan, do you want me to answer or
Oh,
did you?
okay, I thought I lost audio. Well, I mean, the question is whether they're, under their vested cap or not, and thus whether it triggered a traffic review. I mean, that's certainly one argument they could take, but even let's assume that, well, the question really isn't what is the background traffic. The question is, what is the impact of a development upon the existing traffic? So we're not trying, I mean, the commission should not be trying to reduce the background traffic. The commission should be trying to mitigate the impact a development has on the traffic flows in the neighborhood. So you would need to know, kind of, well, what is the peak time and when would the traffic be coming out of this development? You get into that sort of thing. But as far as sort of generalized, what is the history of quarry, that's, or others, that probably is too much information than you need to know. You don't need to know the general neighborhood. You just need to know what the impact of development is upon it.
Evan?
Yep.
I think this information is really good. It shows that the counts and that the streets are performing as designed, and that the new developments, in my opinion, aren't going to be affected like we were hearing, and that when you get the engineering involved and the counts, everything's fine. We only had, at least in my mind, I only had one side of the problem. I never knew where the actual streets were performing at, and we kind of need to know that to be able to make a good judgment on whether these new projects how they're going to impact the overall area.
Yeah, I mean, if there was no vested cap, from the 20-year development program, then they would need to show what the impact of the traffic is on the neighborhood traffic, and whether it puts it over the tipping point, kind of, so it really clogs it down.
Yeah.
So and each development becomes, I mean, it's a philosophical question whether each development needs to contribute its own mitigation, or you wait for the last one to have to solve the whole problem. It should be each development takes it back to zero, as far as impacts, so that you don't end up putting the last guy on the development. He shouldn't have to shoulder the entire development impact the previous 5 developments did.
I've got a couple questions. I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here, so I'll keep it brief. The roundabout analysis that the city did, looks like they're just, took all the legs of the roundabout, averaged them together, and came up with a level of service. I didn't hear anything about looking at specific, 2 specific things I'm interested in. The leg that is Meadows into the roundabout, Meadows Road heading east into the roundabout. And the other thing is did anybody ever look at the size of the roundabout as from a diameter point of view? Because I live here. Where I'm sitting right now is contiguous to that roundabout. And I can tell you that the big issue with it is the diameter of the roundabout was sized too small. That could have been because it just wasn't available right of way or whatever to put it in there. But it makes it real difficult for people that are heading east on Meadows Road to enter that roundabout with all the traffic streaming through coming south on Carmen off of Cruz. They come into that intersection, into the roundabout, and they just go right through, and it really backs up into Meadows. Because of that, it's difficult to find the right time to quickly get in there because the radius is too small. Now, that said, I mean, I can also testify to the fact that COVID has completely changed everything. I mean, before COVID, it was we'd have to sit in a long line waiting to get our chance to get east on Meadows. But after COVID, I mean, I have no issues whatsoever anywhere around. So I don't know if it's academic or not, to even look at it. The whole world has changed and may never go back. So I don't know what we're really doing. I'll just go back to my original point, which was I just would like developments to be able to have to look at current conditions as they see them and then apply their new trips on that and then see what the levels of service are. That's not experience with the Thornstein project. So that's it.
Let's have Will answer the question about the worst legs.
Okay.
And then I want to answer another question.
I wanted to respond. We did have Keller look at which is the worst leg and how is it operating, because our standards are level of service E average for the whole intersection. That is our standard. We did want to see, well, is that eastbound approach worse than everything else? It is worse, but it's not failing. It is still level of, even in 2035, we were looking at less than 50 seconds of delay at level of service D.
Can you highlight that, Will, with your cursor where that is on here?
No,
Thank you. Yeah.
The only thing I just want to mention is that Kittleson, who did the traffic study for the Cruise Village, had that at volume to capacity over 1 as a result of their project, which is
also looking at HCM 2000 methodology running an older software. So that's 20-year-old software and calculations. We have improved since then.
No, I know that, but we is the traffic engineering profession as a whole, and I can tell you that there's not consistency amongst everybody there. And as the commission, believe me, I understand this a little bit better than most since I'm a civil engineer and deal with this stuff every day. But the rest of the commission doesn't know kinds of things that I just brought up, and so they don't have a feel for the inconsistencies with traffic studies to make reasonable, judgments of whether or not a development is responding to the underlying conditions. And I'll cite what I just said. The Kittleson study and your study are vastly different. They won't know which is better. You can say and state that your software is better, but believe me, if you were on one side of the development argument and they were on the other, they would make a compelling argument, against what you say. If you set up on the commission, you'd have the same problem we do.
Right. So that's why we did this analysis. This is why we hired an independent traffic engineering firm that hasn't done any land use in this town, doesn't have any vested interest, doesn't have any connections, ties, biases, whatever you want to call it, to explain to us what happened here over the years. And what's happened are two things. One, the software has improved, the software options and the methodologies have improved for the general industry of doing level of service analysis for intersections and roundabouts. And two, the other part is that people have gotten better at driving them. And that's what we're seeing. As you can see, the volumes are not that much different. And in fact, you would think that that things would be worse out there. But when you stand out there now, or I should say pre-COVID, it's not that bad. The delay is not an absolute failure, and it wasn't. And that's why we wanted to make sure, how come we had delay or failure indicated back with Cruise Village, but we're not now with as you saw through the years, the different land use cases that came through kept showing it slightly better, that kind of thing. It's like, let's make sense of all of this. And I think that's what we were trying to do here with the Keller analysis.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Erica. I think that it's as objective as you could be. I didn't see them bring up the fact that it was small, for one, small radius.
Yeah.
And I lost my train of thought, but
I guess what I'm coming from is I think, we're getting a little out of our purview. We did our due diligence. We've all been wondering about that Lake Grove area and traffic. And in my opinion, this answers my question. There's no need for us to send out a letter, unless it is something along the lines that this should be communicated to the community, that the feeder streets and Quarry and Cruz Way and Carmen and the roundabout are performing to standards, and people will take sides with that. But when you look at the actual numbers, it's performing as it should be or better. So that kind of takes the point of this, in my mind, there's no need for us to do anything, because that's the planning commission, unless you guys feel differently on the commission.
I agree with that. I hear what Dave's saying. I guess my concern is we got all these letters and complaints, and I guess this hasn't been able to communicate to these people that are writing the letters or concerned that there has been some studies.
And we point them in the right direction.
You know, I want to say that traffic engineering is just one step above stormwater engineering in terms of its uncertainty. I mean, it's not just so the commission knows, it's not a perfect science. And the fact that they've been able to improve their software just 2 years ago is evidence of that. I mean, nothing has really changed in terms of traffic engineering, but yet they're still finding better ways to analyze these intersections. And I'll bring up one example that will send my point home, is that when we were looking at the Cruz Way Village, we talked about that east leg coming up Meadows, and it was at least Kittleson that's had it at a 1.0 volume to capacity issue, level of service E, I think. And their answer to that was, well, it's not going to be a problem because people will just find a different way to go. That was their answer to us. They will just go down, head west on Meadows and go out to Cruz Way another way. So, you got to think about all the different combinations and permutations of how these things can be addressed. And you'll understand that traffic engineering is not, is far from a perfect science. They do a good job with what they've got. And I don't want to, discount the profession in any way, but I'm just saying it requires some judgment always.
Mr. Chairman, Evan here.
Yeah, Evan, go ahead.
I heard some comment that says, well, if we get testimony, we need to point the people who are testifying, to the traffic studies. I mean, the commission's job, I'll just go back to the commission's job, is to receive the evidence and weigh the evidence that is presented. It's not to manufacture or refer people to other evidence that's not in the record. Each party has an obligation to present the evidence that they want to rely on. Some of that evidence may be by traffic engineers. Opponents and proponents may wish to submit traffic engineering. Some of that evidence might also be, lay testimony as to what people are observing. Then it's the commission's job, from the evidence that's received, to weigh that evidence and decide which one is more credible. Is a lay testimony more credible than a professional traffic engineer? I mean, you have to, what is the evidence that you have, and how is the traffic engineering done? And if you have competing traffic engineering reports, you have to decide which one you believe. But it is not to. I would discourage the commission from saying to people, well, we don't give credit to your testimony because we've seen other evidence that's not in this record from the city that talks about a traffic report that was done. It really has to be in this record.
Okay, I understand what you're saying, but what my point is, we have the background information. So now we know, we have a little more education. And I think going any further gets out of our area of expertise as the DRC. In my opinion, we don't need to go any further. No need for a letter. The city's up to date on their homework. Maybe they need to communicate their traffic studies with the citizens a little better. That isn't our purview. Our purview is to review the project as it's submitted. Now we have the background information and we're ready to go.
Yeah. Hey, Craig. Craig, can you put your mute on?
I look at this as what we just listened to was more of an education piece for us, because we do get a lot of questions from both our citizens as well as each other. And I just think that this was exactly as you were saying, Jeff, more of a piece for our information, and spot on. Do we think a letter needs to be sent? No, I think there was a lot of stuff cleared up. The presentation was spot on. Whether or not it would be similar to somebody else's, I don't have that answer, but based off of what my role is, or what our role is, this helps clear up some basic questions that I have when looking and listening to different testimonies throughout, whether it's by the applicant or whether the public are speaking. I think this was just a good education piece. And if our public wants to be educated on it, instead of, to use the term earlier, the layman or the lay conversation, they can get educated as well. I mean, that's kind of how I see it.
Will, stop sharing screen, I think. We're done.
Jason, only thing I want to say to that is that we thought about sending a letter to the council because we were worried about the fact that the Shorenstein development did not have all the current data, that they had an old deal that they could rely upon. It didn't have to do a traffic study, which seemed contrary to what common sense would dictate, which is you want to see what the impacts of your development are on the actual background traffic that's there. And, all I'm saying is that it's very possible that that kind of thing could happen in other projects that come up, that we may not have all the information. And, and I generally agree that, based upon what we've heard, at least in the Cruise Way area and the roundabout, there's no need to send a letter. But we may want to consider send something in general that, we have repeating issues with disagreement between, what the applicant says the traffic can handle and what the public perceives as a traffic problem. And we would like to redouble our statement that that these applications are fully up to speed with the current condition. And that's it. That's the only thing I ever wanted to say. Did I have my mute button on?
No, I heard you.
Mayor, this is Jessica. Erica, are you aware of any other, besides this development agreement for this particular site, Shorenstein? I believe this is the last lot to be developed in this area. Are you aware of any other development agreements in this area that might come about in the future? I'm not. I just
No, there aren't. And again, we would, whatever development happens or redevelopment happens out there, because we're kind of almost maxed out on, there's not really any vacant lots left, if you will. But as redevelopment occurs, what we'll do, as always, is look at what's the net difference in the traffic of before and what they're proposing. And if that triggers the need for a traffic study, then we certainly would require traffic studies to be done at that time. We know that all new developments often can create more traffic, but we do have a kind of a trigger point, which is our 250 ADT or 25 in the peak hour. Is that right? Oh, help me, Will. I'm trying to do it from memory.
Yes.
Yes.
250 ADT or 25 peak hour trips.
Right, and that's a difference, not a total, but a difference. And so, those triggers will be applied to whatever development comes. Your question? No, I'm not aware of any other development agreements out pending out there or in process that would come our way like this. Either here or in another part of town, either for that matter.
And it was that, and there's also the, like the Mercantile Center Oak Properties development was not required to look at that roundabout. I think they may have, after we started asking them, they may have as an offering, went and did it anyway. Yeah, it's part of like the second hearing we had on that. But
They did.
but initially it was not a requirement from the city. And so it's things like that. Well, when is it? I understand that the minimum ADTs that trigger a traffic study, you got to have some minimum. I mean, we don't want, individual residential properties have that do a whole background study. But still, there, during that mercantile project, we did have to suffer the slings and arrows of people saying it's going to cause these huge problems up and down Quarry, and how could you not require them, So, I'm not saying I disagree or agree with the city's approach on that. I'm just bringing it to everybody's attention that those are the issues that we deal with on a case after case basis. And I just want to reiterate that we'd like it to be as comprehensive as possible. And that probably, is what everybody knows is obvious to them anyway, so we probably don't need to write a letter. But that was the intent of why we met tonight, to talk about it.
Although the intent was to get the background information on the traffic for the Lake Oswego area and Cruz, Meadows, Carmen, the roundabout, Quarry, which we got because we kind of thought in the background that it wasn't performing. And in addition, having an old traffic study on the Shorenstein commitment. I'm satisfied from what I've heard from staff that I don't have any questions now. So I guess my question is to everybody else: are you comfortable now with the information you have as far as for background information on traffic? And do you feel there is any need, we need to do anything further? Kurt?
Based on all what I heard, and the statistics from the engineers, I think there was support to say that the city's looked at this issue, and it's I guess it's not as bad as everybody is saying. At least is what I was hearing. And if there are complaints coming from the public, then I'm not sure how the DRC is supposed to be responding unless it's evidence placed in front of us, other than say, we understand the city's looked at it, and there is analysis that if presented to us, we'd be happy to consider. But sending additional letters and requirements, I don't know that that's required at this time.
Thanks, Kurt. Mark, what are you thinking?
Sending a letter asking for what's already been done seems redundant. Thanks.
Thanks. Jason? You with us,
I'm
Jason?
good with everything that was said. I think we're good to go.
Okay. Craig?
Yeah, no, I want to make it clear. I didn't vote no on the project because of traffic. I think there's other issues that I was concerned about between a neighbor and a citizen paying property taxes were more concerning to me than traffic, and I'll just leave it at that.
We're not talking about that application. So.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Randy? Randy, you still with us? Randy? Okay, David, you good?
I'm good.
Randy was muted.
Was I muted? How do I?
You're okay now.
Okay. I'm struggling with technology, excuse me. I appreciated the presentation and information given by the professional staff tonight. And I concur with Dave Paulson's comments and agree that it's not necessary for the DRC to write the letter we're considering. Thank you.
Okay, I would personally like to thank staff, Jessica, Evan, Erica, and Will for putting in the effort to educate us a little bit. And I know that's probably more than what you would normally do, and we appreciate it, all of us. And I tell this to all my friends when they talk about the city. I always tell them the people that work for the city do a really good job, and they're following the rules that we set up. And I'm never let down with what they present to us when we ask for it. So thank you very much. I don't believe we have anything else unless I'm wrong. Jessica, do we have anything else?
Yeah, so we are joined here right now by the planning director, Scott Siegel, and he wanted to provide, it's very brief, there is a related amendment, code amendment that the planning commission has on their work program that the DRC may want to provide input on. So Scott was here to just tell you a little bit about that and invite the DRC to participate when the planning commission gets the item. Scott, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Chair and members of the Development Review Commission. Really not a whole lot to add. I just wanted to let the Commission know that your counterparts on the Planning Commission have studied this issue, and they've received a similar briefing, albeit about a year ago, and will continue to look at traffic conditions in the Cruiseway Corridor, as well as the larger planning issues that we would routinely look at when we're reviewing and updating the city's transportation system plan. So this is not a static, question. It's very much an open question that we continue to look at citywide. And the traffic studies that you see with development applications are really just a snapshot in time. So when we review and update the transportation system plan, and when we see a signal that there is a problem with the system, then we do step back and we'll study the area, with Erica and her team. And so I just wanted to assure you that that is an ongoing practice that we have. The code amendment that the Planning Commission will be looking at probably sometime later this year, early next year, is more of a code maintenance item. There's some language in the code that directs traffic studies or guides traffic studies in the Cruiseway area. So that's Cruiseway and the surrounding street system. And it was developed, many decades ago. And I think it came about around the time that Cruiseway was originally developed and the corridor had not yet built out. So there was obviously a lot of attention around that area at the time. The community was, concerned, understandably so, about what the long-term impact of development might be in that area. And so the code has some criteria that are in some ways redundant with the traffic impact study requirements that apply to all development in the city. But it contains some unusual requirements as well that, frankly, are not enforceable. They include things like, the city would at some point apportion all of the trips that may be allowed in this area across properties. And we're, that isn't really something that can be done through a development application review. It's more of it'd be more of a zoning question. Do you rezone the area? And that's just an example of what the code was sort of considering as a, I guess, a best management practice. And there are a couple of triggers in there without going into a lot of details. One of the triggers is if the level of service at a key intersection were to drop below D, and then a number of mitigation measures would be put in place. And then there's another threshold where if traffic level of service were to drop below C, then a task force would be formed amongst the property owners in the corridor and the city, presumably, that would somehow manage that issue, or would look at traffic studies when they're submitted with development applications. Of course, the city cannot require an applicant to form a task force. And at this point, the city council, under their authority, have not appointed a task force to look at traffic in the Cruiseway Corridor. But again, I think it goes back to the way that the city manages the transportation system and periodically reviews the transportation plan. And that would be the point where the city council could establish a policy that we're going to have a standing committee or a task force or we're going to take a different direction on traffic mitigation in the corridor. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. It's something, actually, when we see development applications that come before you, that traffic management provision of the code is addressed by staff. The applicants are required to respond to it. In some ways, it really doesn't have any effect, but in other ways, it is redundant with the traffic mitigation or traffic management and traffic mitigation requirements that are already in the code and apply citywide. So if you're interested in the topic and want to follow it, or if you want to provide input to the Planning Commission when they take it up, Jessica certainly let you know, and it may be a good occasion actually to have the DRC and the Planning Commission meet jointly, so the Planning Commission can benefit from your experience and expertise looking at development, and likewise you can have input into the policy development. So I'm happy to answer any questions. That's really all I wanted to add to the discussion this evening. Thank you for giving staff some time to brief the group on traffic in the corridor.
Scott, did I hear correctly that you're thinking about raising the level of service up to C or D before additional studies, or could you tell me that again, how that was going to work?
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner Paulson. I was just describing what's currently in the code for the cruiseway corridor. You know, the standard right now is a traffic study, or I guess mitigation, you know, could be required. The DRC could impose requirements or exactions where level of service drops below D, I believe it was at E, Erica. E, excuse me, thanks, Will. So where level of service drops below E, the language in it is actually E in the code for the cruiseway corridor, but there's a second threshold in there that talks about establishing this task force. And that's where traffic levels of service, if they were to drop below C, then the city somehow would establish this task force. And that hasn't occurred, obviously. And it's not something that the city can actually require of a developer or an applicant to do. It's more of a, you know, by direction of the city council to establish a task force. But at this point, we don't have any reason to recommend that. And, you know, as Erica has described, the system is, you know, operating at an acceptable level of service based on current standards and, you know, methods of doing traffic studies.
Right. Well, I was just interested in the interplay between, you know, what generates a traffic study by an individual applicant versus the kind of incremental system repairs we have to make that are funded through SDCs, you know, and TIF fees, you know, and there's kind of a, you know, a balancing act there between those two. You know? So it's
yeah, and that's again probably going back into the planning and CIP portion of what the city does. But the system development charges are calculated, and the methodology is developed around the city's transportation system plan and the projects that are on that CIP. We cannot charge SDCs for projects that are outside of that plan. So, you know, it isn't strictly plan implementation. So a development application comes to the DRC, given, you know, the characteristics of that individual development. There's some offsite impacts on the transportation system. Let's say, you know, a signal warrant is met, a new traffic signal is warranted. Then you know, the DRC can impose that as a requirement or a condition. The applicant would be required to pay their, you know, proportionate share toward that mitigation. And the SDCs is one way that they do that. They can get credit, you know, toward that exaction through the amount they're assessed with SDCs. And, you know, there's a number of calculations that happen there, but that's sort of how all of this ties together, from the TSP to the code, to the development review, to the mitigation requirements that you set.
yeah. Well, I just wanted the commission to get an understanding of the whole dynamic there. So, you know, they don't feel like if they approve something that there's not other ways that we handle traffic impacts citywide, you know. That's important.
Thank you, Chair. That's all I have.
Did we lose Jeff? Jeff? I guess the co-chair might have to take over. Adjourned.
Before we adjourn, is it okay if I do a schedule update with the commission?
Yes, okay.
I wanted to let you know the next meeting, scheduled meeting for the DRC is on August 3rd. We have one item for that evening, and it's a tree appeal. I do want to let you know that this is generally, we receive between 2 and 4 tree appeals a year, and because a lot of people do landscaping projects during the summer, those often come in during the summer. So we actually have another tree appeal that's scheduled for August 17th as well. So on the 3rd, you'll have one item, and on August 17th, you'll have 2 items. One is for a DR for a small accessory structure that's in the Lake Grove Shopping Center, and then you also will have a tree appeal. I think we received another tree appeal recently as well, so I just want to warn you, you have a few of those coming up. August 3rd, I will not be there. I will be out of town, but Scott Siegel, planning director, will be filling in my place. But I will be back on the 17th. And that's the update. That's the only items scheduled that I know so far, which would be, again, August 3rd and August 17th, both starting at 7 p.m.
Thanks, Jessica. That sounds like a hoot. A tree appeal. We love those things.
I know.
Okay, if Jeff, you still there, or am I going to have to officially assume the role to adjourn? Evan, anything else from you?
No, not from me. I see Jeff's on mute.
Okay, yep. So
Can you hear
unless
me?
anybody has anything else, I call what's the date today? The July 20th DRC meeting to a close. Have a nice night.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.